Hey, all you Ephesians studying guys and gals. Ephesians 3, 1 through 13. Who's in charge of your life? Is it a calling and power? Well, where do you get yours? So, verse 1. Paul refers to himself as a prisoner of Jesus. For Jesus. Of Jesus is in some translations. But if I say I'm a prisoner for, I'm doing him a favor. So, he refers to himself as a prisoner for Jesus. Of Jesus. Gives the impression that Paul is a prisoner of Jesus. But he's for it. Romans here arrested and imprisoned him. So why would he say that? Fatalism. Belief that all events are predetermined and unescapable. Don't fall for it. Paul's writings, he was not a fatalist, okay? But maybe a determinist. The doctrine that all events are determined by things that are outside of our control or outside of our will, and things that happen that are outside of our control, nothing you can do to change it, which is determinism. We are at the mercy of circumstances. Paul did not feel like, though, he was a victim, okay? He was a prisoner for Jesus. Very important word there. And Paul may have thought Jesus is in charge of his life. Paul knew Rome, and Rome was not in charge of his life. Amen. Even though they had arrested him. Who's in charge of your life? Think about that. Is it your bills? Is it, I don't know, your family? Which can kind of an easy pitfall. When we go through hard times, though, they scream at us and they say they are in charge of our lives. But think about it. Pilate's voice, was the voice of pain, troubles, and trials. And look at John 19, 10 through 11. I mean, what does Pilate say? Don't you know I have the power to release you? Jesus says, power is given to you. It's my words from above. Where, God, the total submission here is from Jesus. And sometimes we give in to trials. Human nature, it's normal. But Jesus' response is so important. He had to have looked Pilate straight in the eye, which our culture wants us to be a victim. And we can say the same thing to regarding our problems. We are safe in his arms. Jesus said, no power but given to you from above. Woo! Paul answers it by saying a prisoner of, answering the question as to who is in charge of his life. Chains belong to Rome, but Rome belonged to Jesus. It is not how we feel, but who we are. So when you pray, whatever you're going through right now, I think you can say this verse. Just say and confess with your mouth to the Lord that things are not in charge. God, you are. I choose to trust you. And, just put it in his hands. And there's something freeing about that. I know tomorrow you're going to worry about it, but every time it comes up, just say, Lord, I'm trusting you. I've got to trust you. I know I can. That's what I say when I'm tempted not to. So, and the church is never mentioned in the Old Testament, and Israel is, of course, and that's kind of a mystery to a lot of theologians. But look at verses 2 and 5. Paul talks about that mystery. He refers to something revealed and made known, the mystery that was previously hidden. Jesus' promise to Israel and his ministry was to the Jews. The Jews rejected Jesus, so set Jews aside temporarily and focus now on the church. God did not reject Israel. Read Romans 11. Verse 6, though, living in the church age is never revealed in the Old Testament. And that is why it's called a mystery, once hidden, but now revealed. And some of that is called, and this is what we call the mountain peaks of prophecy. If you can imagine just looking at the tops of the peaks, and the mountains, the prophets saw the mountains. They did not see the valleys. And in that valley, if you can look at it as the view of the Old Testament prophets, past fulfillments, and then in the middle of that and the future fulfillment is a valley. And it's called the church age. And that's why we call it the mountain peaks of prophecy. They couldn't see the church age. All they could see was the mountaintop peaks. It just prophesied what they saw. They did not see the church age. So let's look at verse 7. Of this gospel, good news. Don't look at the work minister and see a title. It was what he did. It is the Greek word for where we get our word deacon, one who serves. Given me, in verse 7. I was called and I was given power to fulfill that calling. I emphasize that as we have gotten away from the calling and power. That's what our lesson is about today. We've gotten away from our calling. What is your calling? Think about it. Are you called to just pray for people in the church? We're all called. We can all tithe. We can all pray. But grace in this instant refers to power. How did we get to where an impressive resume meant more than a calling? The Old Testament never involved a degree for a preacher. I'm not against degrees. Mind you, I have a couple myself. 3, in fact. This applies to us as we need to know how a pastor has become a pastor and leaders in the church and the calling that is in all of us. You have a calling. Look at Ephesians 4:1. Walk in our calling to live a godly life and bring him glory. Share the good news and help our fellow man. There is a power that goes with that. The pressure of living a godly life. Look at verse 20 in Ephesians. Now let's look at verses 8 through 13 and conclude our talk today. Paul says, grace and power was given. Amen. Even though I'm the least, God calls the least. Because Paul was a murderer. He called the least. David was a murderer and an adulterer. And yet God said, this is a man after my own heart. Not that God is a murderer or an adulterer, but his heart, the attitude of his heart is what God's after. Nothing interferes with the flow of God's spirit. God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Boldness, which helps us walk in power. Look at Hebrews 4, verse 16. We don't when we don't use this, instead we check out a new self-help book instead of going to the throne of grace. We're lacking. We're not tapping into the real power. Holy means to be set apart. It doesn't mean to be perfect, but it means that God gives us grace and power to continue on. I'll see you all next week soon, I hope.